Well, thank you very much, Lizanne and Graham, for a very stimulating discussion. I'm Michael Skapinker, contributing editor at the Financial Times. I'll be your host for much of the rest of today. I think what was so fascinating in that discussion was Graham saying people have got to take their shareholders with them as they move into this new world. That's a very important point. I think we were also very struck by the fact that in his own organization, everybody knows what everybody earns. It's a bold step, but as he said, one that's very important for inclusion and particularly for shrinking the gender pay gap. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to be moving into a series of panel discussions, and we're going to be starting with the first one, which is going to be fittingly about the future of the workplace as we slowly start to emerge from this worldwide pandemic. And I'm delighted to be joined by three very distinguished panelists: Mohammad Al-Sharhan, who is the Global HR Director at EQUATE, the Petrochemicals company; Mirjam Baijens, who is the Global Head of Talent and Development at Schindler; and Susanna Mander, who is Global Senior Director for Brand Marketing at Melià Hotels. Welcome to all of you. We're going to be talking, as I said, about the future of the workplace. And as we look at the workplace as it is today, if I can start with you, Mirjam, what do you think the main features are of the new world of work?
Thank you, Michael. Well, I think everyone, including Schindler, is still, evolving as we speak of what this looks like. But I think one of the main things we've learned through the pandemic is that, especially for people who are not working in the field, and I'll get back to that in a second, like office workers, that the remote working has worked, that people actually increase their productivity. And now it's about finding the right balance between being in the office and being at home and still providing that flexibility to people. Because we've seen that offering more flexible ways of working helps us to also attract different type of people who otherwise might not choose to work for our organization. Now, what we have to bear in mind, and this is similar to the situation that Mohammed is facing in his organization, is we have 30,000 people who work in the field. So they have to be on site to either install elevators or repair escalators, elevators, or maintenance. And this is something you can only to a certain extent do remotely. So we are going through a lot of dialogues at the moment to see how we can, first of all, continue to protect these employees, but secondly, what type of flexibility we could offer to those employees. The answer varies across the world because there are also different rules and regulations, but this is a topic that is very much on the top of our minds at the moment, to also provide an equitable approach to employees no matter where they work.
Well, thank you very much, Mirjam. And as you said, both you and Mohammed, and I guess to some extent also Susanna, well, certainly as well Susanna in the hotel industry, you both have industries, you both have companies where some people can work remotely, some people can't. And that's something I'd like to come on to. But before we do, Mohammed, if we can just talk about something, I'd just like to pick up something that Graham Codrington said in the previous session, where he said, don't worry about productivity for the moment. You've got to take your foot off the pedal for a bit. Tell me what you think has happened to productivity, because yours is an industry that we very much depended on during this pandemic.
Yeah, so productivity actually, of course, we had people working in the plants. Those were actually still asked to go to work. However, they were working at minimum staffing levels, meaning the minimum required to run a safe operation, to make sure that we have our products being delivered, of course, with all the precautions, the safe distancing. And of course, it's an open area, it's a big area, so this was not a concern. So productivity, in a sense, of the people who had to come was there, but also the productivity of the people who had to work from home. It was, people do very well in a crisis management situation. So when the company and the world is facing a crisis, and this is something known, like in the US, the best thing that, for a president in an election is when there is some kind of a crisis or a war. So even in companies, when you have a crisis, people tend to step up. And this certainly happened in my organization, And I believe organizations across the world, where we had people stepping up, working very hard, a long time. Of course, we had, and I think as most companies do, a good IT system. You know, of course, everybody has laptops or even smartphones with all the tools that we know about, the virtual working tools were already set up. With that being available, I think the productivity was there, and the worst you can say about it, at least, is that it did not decrease. But definitely, I think in most cases it did increase. However, I think now sustaining this and increasing this in a non-crisis situation is something that needs to be deliberate and needs to be well designed and well implemented.
Thank you, Mohammad. And I think the point you made is absolutely crucial. Everybody has been in a sense of crisis. We've all felt we've all got to be there together. We've all got to work for each other. And I'd like to come back in a little bit to that question of how we sustain this over the long term, because this is something that we're probably going to have to be dealing with for quite a while. Just before I come to Susanna, just to mention, you've got a QR code on your screen where you can submit your questions. As we talk, please do submit your questions, because I'd like to bring some of your questions in as well, so that things that are on your mind that we can talk about to our panelists. Now, Susanna, the travel industry has faced, I think, probably the greatest crisis that it's ever seen, certainly the greatest crisis since the Second World War. And I just want you to talk us through a little bit how you as a company have dealt with this.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks everyone. Well, for sure, and now we can talk about it in a more serene way, but we went through a very, very hard time. Hotels were closed all across the globe for us. We have more than 370 hotels globally, and we saw a very difficult to manage roller coaster, because everything started from Asia, where we had more than 30 hotels there. So our Asian colleagues started started with the circle of locking down and then go back, and then domino effect across the world. So we had a lot of experience with them, because of course we took all the best practice on how they manage the situation in the pandemic. But what happened, the change affected as Mohammad was saying and Mirjam was saying, that we had teams that before had to go to the hotels to work. So the hotel teams plus the corporate teams had to stay locked down for a while. What we did, we actually had done some changes prior to the pandemic, which was trying to promote and push creativity, connection, and social interaction for better performance with open spaces offices. So this is kind of the big changes. So the big open spaces, now that we go and talk about remote working, have changed so much, because before, we were all attached to each other, very close to each other, and now we unfortunately have to be a little bit more distant, no? But what we did, we kind of, on one side, all the hotel operation teams were able to participate in many, many hours of training on our learning platform, which I thought was one of the biggest benefits of this pandemic situation, was that there was time available for training, which I think it's one of the time that usually gets cut back when the situation is moving fast in business overall. So training with Melià, our platform for all the hotel teams plus the corporate teams, and then the hotel teams starting to slowly go back. But the corporate teams, where we have our headquarters where I am based. I'm sitting in Palma de Mallorca, Michael. That I know that it's a very appealing destination for all of you, so you're very well invited to come and visit. But in Palma de Mallorca, our headquarters used to host almost 700 employees and associates. So we have to kind of reinvent the way we go back to the office. And when we came back from the pandemic, the hotels opened at full speed in the destination that had business, while the corporate office, we kept a 50-50 hybrid model with 5 days at the office and 5 days working from home, as we are so many, and we had to split in shifts in shifts anyway. So that's how we managed. But we also created an opportunity with when the hotels starting to open to kind of give new travelers, it was mostly local, because home working presented a lot of challenges in terms of how, some profiles couldn't find a proper privacy and proper tranquility to work from home. So we created a program that allows you to rent a room at the hotel for the day and using the facility.
I'd like to come. We'll come back to that, Susanna, because I want to talk about the future of travel. So thank you for that. But just, Mirjam, just to pick up Susanna's point about some people coming back into the office, some people not coming back to the office. As Susanna said, she's sitting in Palma de Mallorca, and I've got very fond memories before lockdown of actually being in Palma in the winter sunshine to deliver a training program at Melià. But let's talk about Schindler. You know about offices. You know what's happening in offices. You see what's happening in offices. Tell us what you think the office is looking like now. I am sitting in FT headquarters in London, but mostly people are doing a mixture of working from home and coming into the office. What is the future of the office? What is the future of office working in your view?
Yeah, we see a difference across countries, because what you see in Schindler is that the setup is quite decentralized. So the countries run a lot of things also locally. Of course, we have clear guidance from a group point of view. But this is where you see quite a difference, that some countries are more advanced and are actually rethinking how much office space they need, because they truly believe and support this flexible model. In some countries, you see that we go a bit slower. We have a lot of offices which are open plan offices. So like the big open spaces. And this is where we have to really assess how comfortable do people feel to come back. So you see that already measures have been taken by, changing the setup or using the large office spaces more as meeting spaces. But it varies considerably across the globe in that sense. And I also think that that is right, because the pandemic is in various stages and there is not the one size fits all. However, this will continue to be evolving. And honestly, based on a lot of the research we've done, and also what I hear from other organizations and peers, is that the office becomes more and more a place where you socialize, where you meet, where you connect. And a lot of the actual meetings can still take place virtually, especially when you work in global teams or in, I hear a voice in the background.
No, we're
I don't
fine.
think you were saying so. Okay, good. You have then a different setup, because if you are constantly in virtual meetings, what's the point of doing that from the office if you can't even leave your desk to meet a colleague? So those are the different models that we're looking at. But certainly we're not expanding office space. It would actually be, the other way around.
Okay, we've got some very interesting questions coming in. And the first question, I'll put it to you, Mohammad, and I'd like you all to think of, what do the panelists think, just based on what Mirjam has just said about the variation across the world, what do the panelists think about mandating that people have to come back into the office? What is your view on this, Mohammad? I'd be interested to know what you're doing at EQUATE, but in general, you're somebody who surveys leadership. I wonder what you think this should be. What should companies be doing?
Well, I think it's, the traditional thinking of I need to see you to believe that you're working needs to shift. And the fact that, hybrid work or remote work is a new reality that if a company doesn't embrace early on, it will be late to the game. And this is something where you need to embrace a new reality that is coming. Now, having said that, of course, different jobs or different roles have different requirements, and maybe we could talk about later about how someone can evaluate a specific job, whether this job has to be physical, like something related to machinery or maintenance, or some jobs where they can be hybrid or even fully remote. However, given that the employees believe some those roles that can be remote once they believe that they have proven, and this is, by the way, this is the main trigger. What happened is that we have people who said, you know what, we have proven that we can be productive and contribute remotely and use all these tools. So why do you want us to come back? And unless the employer has a very good answer to that, then this will become a retention issue. Because now, if you don't, if you're not reasonable, of course, I believe people are reasonable. If you make the case that you need to be there at least some of the time for a specific purpose, they'll probably understand. However, if you don't have any answer other than, you know, I'm not comfortable until you come or unless you come, then, you know, you might be facing a retention issue here, and people might leave the organization.
Very important point, Mohammad, and we'll come back to that because I'm going to ask you a bit later, all of you, about what this means for leadership. But Susanna, if we can just pick up what Mohammad said, that people are going to want to have a good reason to come back. You're going to have to be reasonable about it. You're going to have to persuade them that there's a good purpose to them being in the office. And the next question from those, and please do keep your questions coming. These are very good questions. The next question from people listening to us is whether you've managed to strike a good balance between remote and office-based work, and if you've got any advice for HR people who are struggling with this. I wonder if you could just pick up both that question and what Mohammad has just said.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, I have to say that the hybrid model that we're talking about, smart working and presential attendance at the office is a challenge. So it's not something as easy. It looks good. It sounds good. Oh, we do half of the time in the office, half of the time home. That's all great. Well, it's a challenge because overall, at different levels, I think it affects the team connectivity at some point. I'm not saying that it's not valid, but I think we need to look seriously at how leadership comes and gets involved in the process, and also how you measure, to Mohammed's point, performance. So it's very difficult to now find a perfect balance because I manage two multifunctional teams, okay? And then when we are all in the office, of course, everything flows differently. We talk to each other, you know, we meet unexpectedly. There's many positive things that are happening by being connected to your colleagues in an office space. Now, when we are not in the office, we have managed to find, you know, proper processes in order to get together virtually. But it's still very effective, and I think that the big challenge nowadays is exactly how to find that balance. But the balance is that you need to understand, first of all, how your team works. Each one of your teams is not only a group of people, because now what I think is super interesting, and I've analyzed that with my team in these days, is that each person takes and assumes smart working in a different way according to the personal situation. That's why it's good. So it's so personalized that it's very different to find something common to everybody. So that's, I think, the big challenge of company nowadays is how do I manage performance, manage my leadership when I see the team 5 days yes and 5 days no, for example, in our case. But I think, I'm going to give my 2 cents here, you know, for this question is, first of all, we have to run away from micromanagement. That's a no for this type of hybrid situation. Second of all, we need to build trust. A trustful leadership, I think, is the future for this type of situation. And then the third big positive point of all of that I think leaders and people managers should you know, make sure that they really do is to kind of understanding you know, how the motivation is actually giving more productivity to the team. So
Right.
Again, I think those are my three big points.
Well, that is very useful. Thank you very much, Susanna. And if I can just come, because one of the people participating, one of the people listening in, has astutely noticed that in the description of this panel, we said new types of leaders are required. And Mohammad, you've mentioned it. Susanna, you've mentioned it. And Susanna, you particularly mentioned the point that micromanagement is dead. And I wonder if you could pick that up, Mirjam. What is the new style of leadership as we emerge from this crisis?
Well, I can answer that in the sense of what I would like to see as a new style of leadership. I will not claim that we have already implemented that, but I can fully concur with what Susanna said. I mean, we have seen now that the remote working works, and this element of micromanagement and trust is, that is not the future of leadership. And I think the leaders that will emerge, and also the companies that will emerge as the ones with a strong vision and leadership, is that they give that empowerment back to their people, but that they also equip them to do that, because it requires a different way of working, a different way of collaborating. And to Susanna's point, what she mentioned earlier, we've invested also a lot in training in the last 18 months, because COVID actually helped in a good way to do everything virtually. Whereas previously virtual training was a bit, well, people preferred classroom training. And we've done a lot of short, dedicated learning sessions also for leaders about topics that are now critical in terms of their communication, decision-making, emotional intelligence, to little by little prepare them for this different way of being a successful leader. Because honestly, and I know we still have a few of those leaders, unfortunately, who think we're now just going back to the way it was before COVID. But if we fall into that trap, we miss a complete opportunity in terms of, how are you a good employer, and what is your employer branding, and what is your employer value proposition? But at the same time, how do you keep your talent motivated in this new future? So that would be my answer. Do we have that everywhere in place? Probably not, although I see many, many strong examples, but this is an ongoing focus area that we need to manage.
Well, thank you very much, Mohammad. If we can just come to that, because one of the things we're seeing, they're talking in the US, in the UK to some extent as well, about the great resignation, the big quit. Employees walking off the job. They've basically seen that through this pandemic, they've had to think, what do I actually want in life? What do I actually want from work? And a lot of them are saying, we just don't want this sort of life anymore. I'm going to look at something else. So can you put those two things together for us, Mohammad? A new style of leadership, and you've already mentioned the retention challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Michael, for the question. That's a very good combination. So just if you kind of go back and build on the trust issue, trust is required for any kind of leadership, whether it's in office or hybrid or remote. However, I think the trust issue amplifies the leader's ability and an elevated need for his or her ability to manage performance. Because if a leader can only manage performance through seeing the person working, whether it's actually productive or not, then that leader is going to suffer in this new setup. However, a new leader, or a leader that will survive in the coming change, is a leader who is able to measure results, measure outcome, measure deliverables of the employees. Once you're able to do that, then it doesn't matter if you see the employee or not. That's one aspect. The other aspect that relates to what you mentioned about how people feel, this idea of leaders being able to support work-life well-being, even with a remote setup. First, the idea of being flexible and trusting that the employee, if they cannot do the job in the morning time because they have to do something, they can do it in the evening time. Having that flexibility says everything about how the company and the leader care about the employee's well-being. Another thing is the leader ability to connect with the employees even when they're remote. So if we have employees who are lonely, who are in the apartment alone. Now in an office setup, you after a meeting you could have corridor discussions, or passing by their office. You look like you're stressed out, or it seems like you're something up. How's it going? How are you feeling? These questions come up in a physical setting easily, because it's just our human natural tendency to socialize. In a hybrid or in a remote setup, the leaders need to be deliberate in doing that, meaning that the leader needs to be comfortable calling the employee, not to ask about a deadline or a project outcome, but to ask, how's it going? How are you feeling? Because they're probably some of them alone in an apartment. So that unless we have that, then we have this exodus, or we have this retention issue, because people don't feel like they're being treated as a whole being, someone who has work life, but also they have social life, interests, hobbies, things that they'd like to pursue as well. So I think the companies that will succeed in the future are companies who are able to strike this balance where, yes, they will have their productivity and the outcomes and the customer deliverables. However, they do it in a way that will accommodate the needs and the well-being of their employees and the flexibility that goes along with that.
Then thank you, Mohammad. That is a big challenge, isn't it? Because you're saying two things. You're saying, first of all, you need to start, managers have got to do what the best managers always did, really, which is measure people by their output and their results rather than their input and how much time they're spending in the office. But secondly, to keep a far closer eye on how people are and how they're doing. Of course, some people in the office manage to hide their problems as well. So that's a big challenge too. I'd just like to come to a question that somebody's asked about something that was said in the last session. Graham Codrington, when he was talking to Lisanne Gale, said that in his company, everybody knows what everybody earns. And one of the people watching us today has asked the question, the flip side of making the salaries clear is you also have to make clear who is contributing what, how much is each person contributing. I'd just like to go around to each of you to ask you, first of all, in this new world of work, this new world of trust, as you all said, are you going to start telling your people or start announcing this is how much we all earn and this is how much we're all contributing? Susanna, what do you think about this idea? Is this something your company does or would ever think of doing?
Well, I have to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised because we just had a little bit of a situation with one associate that told everybody about a raise in salary and created a huge problems within the department. So I am not a fan. This is my personal point of view. I'm not a fan of create transparency on salaries. I think that's a very, very, very delicate issue. And I understand the reason why. I said, okay, we all earn the same or we all earn these, and we need to understand which output comes from each one of us. I think it's a little bit too operational, less human. I think the associate profiles need to be rewarded accordingly to their objective, their functions and their roles. So we don't have that in Melià International. Actually, we try to avoid the transparency on this. And when it doesn't happen, because sometimes associates are talking, it doesn't really create a good atmosphere because there's always some historical situation that doesn't match with the reality. So we never start from scratch after the pandemic, Michael. You follow what I'm saying? So I believe
absolutely, and yeah.
But on
I think many people will identify with that.
Yeah, I'm sure. So
yeah.
And actually, associates that came back from furloughing and had 50% of the salary. Why is coming back? I'm not coming back. It has been very, very delicate and very difficult on the human side to manage the comeback of the teams that were furloughed, during the pandemic, and that's a part. I think the human part, as Mohammad was saying, it's really key to keep people, motivated. The output, I think it's super important, and I want to put back another challenge on the table, and is how do we manage performance in this hybrid model? How do you really check the output of your teams and of your associates when you don't see them all the time? It depends on the area. So in my area, for example, which is strategic marketing and operational marketing at the hotels, we kind of have to show the plans. I mean, the output is very easy. It's the plan of work for the year. So following up properly, and again, personalizing a little bit according to the profile of the associates, it's what new leaders should do, and how we manage output as well.
Great, thank you. Just before, I don't want to drop this question of salary transparency just yet, Mirjam, because one of the things that Graham said is keeping salaries hidden, not telling people how much they earn, is one of the ways in which the gender pay gap has grown. That women, for example, have not known how much men doing the same job were doing. What do you think about salary transparency?
Yeah, it's interesting because this topic is something we actually discussed also last week, so very recently in the Schindler management team. And there are two aspects to answer your second element of equitable pay between gender. Is we have been running a global survey to assess if there are differences between the way women are paid versus men. And fortunately, that is there are no major issues in Schindler. So in that sense, the pay is equitable. There is no gender gap, which is already very positive. However, we had then a follow-up discussion to say, should we give transparency about people's grades? So that is not the exact salary, but at least you understand in which pay band you are. So you understand, okay, what is the range? And a decision was made not to give transparency about grades because the concern is that it raises expectations and people start comparing. Now, from my own personal experience, but this is me talking based on my experience in the past when I worked at a very large IT company, everyone knew their grade. So you knew at least the range where you were at. It was not that I knew the salary of my colleagues, but me, myself, I was aware what my grade was and where I was on the pay band. And honestly, I never saw any issues with that. And we never had any issues. Of course, it requires strong leadership because as a manager, you have to manage expectations and also explain why someone is on this grade and maybe a colleague is on a higher grade because they have more experience but there was full transparency in this very large organization, and I don't think there were any issues. It was not to the level that everyone could see everyone's salary, but at least you knew what is your grade and where you are. In Schindler, we've taken deliberately the approach like we don't give transparency for obviously good reasons. I've seen it personally also work if you give transparency. So there are pros and cons of both ways.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to come on to the next question, and if I could put it to you, Mohammad, because you've already mentioned some of this. Somebody has asked, how are you dealing with negativity from employees who ask to come back into the office for culture building reasons, who really want to work from home? And I wonder if you've experienced any of that negativity.
Well, I mean, we haven't experienced it yet because, well, in Kuwait, we are back to work and we haven't really, I mean, in the Gulf here or in the Middle East, it's not yet a big thing. Now, when it comes to Canada and the US, we have, we have our locations in Canada and the US plants. Now, the plant people have never stopped working, so that's not, that's not something that they have to be there to operate the plants. So that's not an issue. Now, the people on the office are still working from home because, we're still in a pandemic situation over there. So we haven't yet had to ask people to go to work, and we are hoping to have a policy or a setup in place before that time comes. I mean, it's one of the interesting things is that about 90% of executives say that they envision a hybrid model going forward, and this is a McKinsey study that was done recently. And most of these companies have at best a high-level plan of how to carry it out, but very few, or maybe none, have completely rolled out a strategy or a detailed plan. So it's a situation where most companies are waiting to see how this plays out. Now, when it comes to our offices in Asia, for example, in Hong Kong, it's actually people are not as eager to work from home or work remotely because typically have small houses, small apartments where people welcome actually going out and going to more open areas and more spacious areas. So we don't see this negativity in our Asian offices. but we expect it in North America, but it hasn't happened yet.
Okay, very interesting. We've got about 5 minutes left. And Susanna, I promised we could come back to this because I think it's an issue everybody's very interested in, and that is the future of business travel. I used to travel a huge amount. I felt a bit guilty about my carbon emissions, but it seemed that it was necessary. What we've discovered during this pandemic is we can do a lot more things remotely. Tell us a little bit, Susanna, about what you're seeing on the travel front. Both leisure and business, but particularly business travel, and perhaps the way in which people are combining them. And also, what does the hotel room of the future look like?
Oh, wow. Well, Michael, definitely business travel. It's something that concerns all of us because as leaders in our different areas, we need to travel and we need to move around. So it's obvious that smart working and hybrid models and be able to be flexible from the where you work from has given different opportunities to the travel industry. Right now, if I'm thinking about business travel, we had a conversation with our BT colleagues last week. The trends are very unstable and a little bit more last minute right now because, of course, of potential restrictions and how these roller coasters of restrictions within countries and borders is changing almost daily. And now, more than ever for the winter, because the summer we were all quite happy. But business travel is coming back, and it's coming back in different ways. For example, we kind of manage different types of business travel, which can be individual, can be in groups. But one of the most innovative situation that we have thought about post-pandemic, and now we still use it, but we created a program where we said, hey, we have so many hotels in the cities, and as Mohammad was saying, that there's some countries and there's some also profiles of executives that do not have that privacy at home. So we flip things around it for the hotel industry, and we kind of created a program that was allowing business travel, but mostly not business traveler, but business people from the city to use the hotel rooms for the day, not for the night, but for the day, included all the facilities of the hotel. So that would give privacy for video calls, for important moments, for project management, and also having the opportunity of having colleagues from the office meeting you at the restaurant. We were giving special discounts for the spa. It was a kind of a bleisure situation. We play a lot on bleisure in the sense that you travel for business, but you also enjoy leisure. But
so
again,
bleisure, as we call it, yeah.
Exactly, bleisure, which is a combination of the two. At the end, the long gone the days where business travel was boring and was really, oh, I'm going to the hotel bar, and no, it's like, oh my God, the hotel will give you all the information, travel guides to discover the city when you finish working. So at the end, I think that the flexibility at work will give everybody a new way of moving around and being able for working from everywhere. One of my associates is going next week to Stockholm, to see her family, and she's working from there, and I have no problem at all. In the sense of that, I know her capabilities, and so I think that it's the whole world is more fluid, and everybody knows that that I can connect from an airport, I can connect from home, I can connect from the office, or I can connect from the street, really. As long as I have a privacy, and as long as I have an environment that allows me to do that.
So it's a kind of pop-up office that you're offering, really. If I can just quickly, because we've just got 2 minutes left. If I could just come to you, Susanna, and you, Mohammad, just for a very quick answer. Right at the height of the pandemic, Bill Gates said he thought only 50% of business travel would come back after the pandemic. I'd just be very interested to very quickly hear from you. What is your guess of the percentage that will come back? Mirjam, what do you think?
We actually still have a global travel freeze until the end of Q1 next year, and we will definitely not get back to the previous level. So I think it will even be less than 50%.
Wow. And what do you think, Mohammad?
Well, I think, of course, it will be it's funny you mentioned that because, of course, with this discussion of hybrid and remote work, you have those people who are, of course, against it. And the argument they're making is, look, I want to tell those people who think that they can do everything remotely, and then suddenly they say, I want to go travel and meet a customer. I want to tell them, you know, how is it that you can meet your colleagues remotely? You think that, and then suddenly for the customer, you have to travel. So definitely, I do see a reduction now that people are more comfortable with what we're doing right now. Actually, this meeting would have probably been, you know, physical in some hotel, Melià maybe, you know, if it wasn't for the pandemic. So I do see a reduction, but of course, what percentage is difficult to tell. One thing that I would hate to end this discussion without mentioning is D&I. D&I is going to be also an issue around this. If for example, we have more women working remotely or hybrid than men, then is this going to disadvantage them? Is this going to put them in a situation where they're out of sight and considered less for promotions? It's a big topic. I'm not going to get into it, but it's a thought that I think needs to be put out there.
I think it's absolutely a thought that needs to be put out there. We've come almost to the end, and I think the real lesson I'm taking from this is going to be very challenging. And I think the managers, and what we've seen from all three of you, the leaders who are going to come out best from this are those who really know how to inspire people to get results rather than stand over them and constantly watch what they're doing. We're going to be picking up some of these topics that have come up. As Mohammad said, the D&I issue is a very important one, diversity and inclusion. Thank you very much to all of our panelists, to Mirjam, Mohammad, and Susanna. Thank you to all of you for your questions. And this is the first, as I say, of several interesting panels we're going to see today. So thank you very much.